All right, just a couple moments to get everyone up to snuff and let them tune into the channel. Got to make room for all the hundreds of thousands of people who are trying to get onto this live broadcast. Okay, I think that's probably enough time to get everybody on. Welcome, Tech Art fans. Welcome to another episode of Tech Art Talk Live. I'm your host, Chris Rhoda, and today we are going to have another installment in our Procedural Gems series. And today, our feature guest is Kevin Mack. Now, I worked with Kevin Mack a long time ago in the good old visual effects days, and right now, Kevin is primarily focusing on virtual reality, but I'm going to put that information aside, and I'm going to let Kevin go ahead and explain for himself. So without due course, let us get started with the interview. Welcome, everyone. This is Chris, and today's installment of Procedural Gems, I'm here with Kevin Mack. And Kevin is, I don't know if I'm allowed to say this, but Kevin, are you the world's first VR fine artist?
Well, I don't think so. I think there were a few, very few. I'm among the first, but there were people, a handful of people doing VR art, back in the '80s, where they were working with NASA or somewhere, and they managed to get access to those very early headsets and created some interesting art projects. But in this latest wave of stuff, I think I was kind of right there at the beginning, doing it before other folks.
Right. Well, anyway, you can find Kevin's art over at kevinmackart.com and at shapespacevr.com. And you can find his work on an app called the Museum of Other Realities and you can find that as an app on Steam. Now, Kevin, is there anywhere else that they can find your work?
Yeah, my piece, Blortasia, is also available on Steam, and it runs the uh, on the Valve Index or the Vive, and it runs. I haven't used it, but I know a lot of people have used it also on the Oculus Rift, and it works on the Windows mixed reality headsets. But it does need a tethered headset.
So it is a
Also, my first piece, which was a 360 video from 2014, is still available on the Oculus Store, I think, for the Go and for the mobile devices. I'm not sure if it's available for the Quest or not. But it's a 360 video, so it's um, an early work.
Okay. Well, when working on content for your websites and the museum, the work is incredibly complex, but it's amazingly coherent. So could you describe the role of proceduralism playing when you're creating these worlds?
Yeah, well, for me, proceduralism has kind of a double value in that the of course the primary one that most people relate to is that it enables you to create a great deal of things, much more easily, but automatically. And so it's also great in terms of when you're building something, you can go back and change things, you can try a lot of different iterations and so on. So it's capable of generating a great deal of complexity quickly. Whereas if you're doing it by hand, you've got to make all that stuff, and it becomes a very time-consuming effort. But for me, there's the added benefit in that, uh, they always say, with these incredible tools that now our only limitation is our imagination. And I found that with this incredible technology, and in particular proceduralism, it allows me to actually create things that I could never imagine. And so I love the procedural process in that I can just try different things with no idea what they will do and stumble onto, uh, incredible things that I really love that I wouldn't have uh, done on my own, or wouldn't have preconceived. And so that process is very valuable to me. I love being able to discover work, and I think I stumbled onto that in the early days where I was doing proceduralism for visual effects and so on. I'd be
Right.
trying to do something very specific, but in that process, inevitably, you're kind of blind in a way to some of the results of what you're doing. And so I just found that I stumbled onto artifacts and mistakes that were so interesting to me as a fine artist that I started incorporating that more proceduralism more into my own work.
So a lot of this is serendipitous finds. You're not necessarily so intentional as if you were like a mathematician, but you're actually discovering these things like, oh, look at this. How about, that's
Yes,
interesting.
well, it's an interesting hybrid because there is intentionality behind it, but it enables me to have a kind of a general intention, a broader intention, and to be able to discover things that, permutations of the possibilities of a given intention. And that ties into an idea which I really love. I found this book that greatly vindicated my process for me. It's a phenomenal book that I highly recommend to all humans. Um, and it's called Why Greatness Cannot Be Planned, or maybe How Greatness Cannot Be Planned, The Myth of the Objective. And it's by two computer scientists who were doing some work in trying to create a, uh, a search algorithm or a way for an agent to navigate a maze.
Hmm.
And they were looking for different algorithms and so on, trying to create algorithms. And they discovered something that just floored them, which was, and then they kind of proved it mathematically, that with any ambitious goal, which is a goal you don't know all the steps to achieve, uh, that a search for novelty is a more effective strategy for achieving that goal than any planned, organized, step-by-step process. And
Really?
yeah, and so this has permutations throughout all of human endeavor, from education to medicine, all kinds of research, everything, in that basically it's a more effective strategy to have an agent just try something new every time than any algorithm you could make.
Hmm.
And so the search for novelty is a more effective strategy for achieving any ambitious goal. And they bring up all these examples of all the great um, achievements of humanity, from television to all manner of technology, and show how these were not planned for. They were discoveries or culminations of a lot of different discoveries that came together. And they talk about them as stepping stones, that they're working on vacuum tubes to do some other thing, and then that's kind of happening, and then they're working on some other thing and they discover another thing, and then pretty soon they go, wow, if we put they accumulate these stepping stones, and suddenly you have enough to create some entirely new thing.
Hmm.
Anyway, I think that's a very valuable thing in the work I do, in that I've always been interested in this process of process of of discovering things, and not being attached to a particular result, just exploring and searching for novelty, looking for things. And so I use proceduralism to generate lots of different possibilities and search through those possibility spaces to discover things that are unique and interesting.
Wow. In order to give yourself try out a whole bunch of things rather than just one thing at a time, you can like let things loose and
Yeah,
just.
exactly. And to find like, a lot of things you generate, you're like, yeah, I've seen that, and yeah, I could make that, and I know about those, and I've seen that shape, and that looks familiar, and so on. And then occasionally you just get a random juxtaposition or something where you go, wow, that's crazy. That looks really interesting and organized, and so on.
Well, do you find yourself creating step wedges in a lot of your exploration?
Um, well, in a sense, but also in a sense not, because the step wedge thing was really is a technique for working in groups with hierarchies, with levels of improvement in approval and so on, where I don't have that. I'm the only one doing my thing, so I don't need to show myself multiple iterations of a thing. I just continue to search, and I discard them as I go, or keep them, set them aside for further exploration, and so on.
Hmm. Well, you mentioned before that that your VR is very computationally demanding, and you said that you had currently had to have a tethered a headset and so forth. So, what special considerations do you have to take have to deal with when dealing and integrating proceduralism with VR?
Well, um, I think really it's not so much that the proceduralism is demanding, because most of what I do is done outside of VR. There's a lot of artists that are working in VR with the tools that are available for sculpting in VR and so on. But that's not procedural at all. There are no procedural tools in VR. And so, well, I still use, manual techniques, manual sculpting, painting, and so on. They become elements or sources to procedural processes. And so I think the, I don't know, I guess what's the heart of your question?
Well,
Uh,
I'm just wondering. Well, actually, I guess you sort of answered it already, and then you're saying that a lot of the procedural techniques that you're employing, you do offline or you pre-bake it into before going
yes,
into VR.
yes. So I'm using some proceduralism, in real time in VR, but not so much. Most of my geometry is created, offline in Houdini, and then imported into Unity. And the biggest thing for really managing the complexity for a given hardware spec is really just in the amount of that geometry. And so Houdini has just the most amazing tools, which are really great in that I use them in a kind of a procedural way. I've got a whole process that I apply sort of at the end of every creation for a given piece. And it's really just poly reduction
Hmm.
and optimization of the topology. And the tools are so good for that now. With VDBs and everything, there's just no limit to what you can do. You can do anything and turn it into a really uh, robust, meaningful topology.
Hmm. Okay. Now, as far as VR is concerned, I know that there are a couple of 3D paint programs and 3D sculpting programs, but do you know of any kind of veer towards more proceduralism inside of VR?
I don't. Yeah, I haven't looked into it that much, but I don't think that's really happened yet. And it's, for me, I think it's questionable. What would the advantage be in VR? And really, that's a question that comes up a lot for me, which is that there are shows, there have art shows for VR art now occasionally, and I get inquiries about my work, and I'm actually excluded from a lot of those shows
Hmm.
because they're only interested in work that's created in VR. And I
Hmm.
think that's such an arbitrary and strange limitation to impose on the work, um, and also an arbitrary definition of VR, in
Right.
that that's just the display. Any computer graphics is VR, if you look at it on a monitor or you look at it in a headset, and of course there's advantages to seeing it in 3D on a headset, but um, there's also advantages to having the abstraction of having it on a screen
Hmm.
and not having to wear a headset and so on. So I think for me, you know, I enjoy it's kind of fun to paint in VR or whatever in 3D is a cool thing, but it feels more like a novelty to me, and there isn't anything I can do there that I couldn't do on my regular computer, and so I think I think something to really consider when you're creating for VR is there, is there an advantage to working in VR? I think if you're doing kind of free form gestural 3D sculptures or paintings, 3D paintings, then yeah, if you're doing tilt brush stuff, that's awesome. It's kind of a genre of its own. But I've found those tools to be kind of limiting, and uh, I really like the being able to bring in all different forms of generative things and procedural things, and plus with my work now, a lot of it's artificial life, and so a lot of that is just coding logic and organizing behavioral systems and whatnot.
Wow. Are you getting are you very involved with machine learning and deep learning?
I wouldn't say very involved. I certainly have been interested in it for decades.
Right.
I got really into it and was more involved, I think, in the 90s, but it was still so nascent then, and I was not a seasoned programmer by any means. So I found myself kind of in over my head, and I realized like I'm not that. I don't enjoy the coding part of it so much. I do a little, but you have to do it a lot to be really good at it. And from years of working with really well educated software engineers, I learned a great deal about it, and and realized, well, that's not exactly my thing, and I want to use it and employ it, but uh, there's philosophies involved and a great deal of complexity in terms of the organization of code and so on. So I tend to write, a lot of my scripts for Unity, the C# scripts, the simple ones I can, wade through myself. That takes me 10 times longer than it would anybody that knew what they were doing, but
Mhm.
I generally get them working. But I get help. I have a friend uh, who's a really sophisticated software developer, and I will write pseudocode and design a whole system, and then he can go through it and go, well, this should be broken down into 3 different scripts, and these should be and really this is how you would organize this, and have you thought of that? And anyway, it really is great. I've really benefited from his expertise, and I rely on it to ensure that my code runs efficiently. And because that's the big thing that's so daunting about coding if you don't do it all the time, is it's sort of like proceduralism. It's like Houdini. There's a million ways to skin any given cat, and the choices you make about which way you approach it have a lot to do with having a more in-depth understanding of how the code is executed and what's sufficient, and so on.
No, I think your entire approach is brilliant. You have to excuse me for gushing over it, but uh, when I'm not doing a Tech Art Talk live, I actually teach technical art at the University of Central Florida, and that's exactly what I'm trying to persuade and to push my students on, is the availability of things like procedurality. Yes, you can still be a fine artist. Yes, you can still be a concept artist, and you don't need to be the master coder, and you don't need to have a PhD in computer science in order to use this. And you can employ other people to kind of help leverage your own skills in order to leverage your ability as a fine artist.
Yes. Also, any given problem you're trying to solve, uh, for the most part, the solutions are are relatively simple if you know what they are. And so, it's you can dig in and kind of Google things and figure out how to do stuff. And even though it's a vast mystery, if you don't know how to do it, um, there's a lot of information out there. And
Yeah.
if you stick with it, you can generally figure out how to do that one thing you're trying to solve. And of course, that's the thing you learn in with working with programmers and everything, is you don't go in and write some huge complex program. You don't just start on the first line and start typing and know how it's all going to work. You build it out of little pieces. You make little blocks of code and you organize them and then and relate them and so on. And you have to start simple and build it up. Likewise, I remember from the early days in visual effects, learning proceduralism and 3D software. There's inevitably you hit these walls where it's like, I don't understand. Why is it doing this? Why isn't it doing what I expect it to do? What am I doing wrong? And uh, I would, I was fortunate to work with a lot of brilliant, technical artists like yourself. And I had the benefit of being able to go, I can't solve this. What did I do wrong? And it would be, I learned so much by watching people who knew what they were doing solve my problem. And it was literally like, it was a mindset. They took on a mindset. They didn't know how to solve my problem. They just knew how to play detective, and they knew how to just be logical and go, okay, well, let's turn this off and see what happens then. Oh, okay, so that tells us it's not that. Okay, we'll turn that back on. Now let's turn this on and see. And it's just like detective work. And it really was a matter of patience. I just was, I was used to just painting or sculpting, and I didn't have to ever wait to solve a problem. I just solved it. And, it's such a different thing of being able to uh, kind of be a master of something and know all the answers for some narrow little thing. Whereas with computer graphics and proceduralism, uh, there are people with great stores of knowledge, but ultimately it's not about, there's no mastery. It's infinite. Nobody could ever be a master. And so it's always that, just always being able to take that beginner mind and that detective approach and patience and just being logical and taking it a piece at a time.
Now, would you say that you extend that same philosophy when you're creating your own current work, your for proceduralism and for your Shapespace VR? You kind of have the same approach, for proceduralism?
Um, I get, yeah, absolutely. Yeah, there are certain processes that I've developed and honed, and pipelines. I have pipelines for doing things where I know how it works and I know how to, and I've gotten really good. I've mastered tweaking this and making that, and I've got a process for doing this thing and for that thing and the other thing. But that becomes, for me, if that's all you're doing, that's tedious. So inevitably, I get a machine and I get a pipeline and it's all buttoned up and working, and I know how it all works. And I'm like, okay, I want to do something that can't do. And so now I might build on it, or I might start from scratch and just try. I get an idea, well, how could I do this? What if it had multiple things coming out of these things? And how would you do that? And I might know some of the answers, and then other ones I will Google, or I'll look at some tutorials, or phone a friend. Although being out of the film industry, I have fewer people I feel comfortable calling because they're working. But and I think nowadays the chief amongst those is my son. And I've always had this incredible benefit. I taught him everything I knew about 3D software and proceduralism and Houdini, which was prisms back then, when he was 11 years old.
Yeah.
And he took to it and quickly exceeded my capabilities. And now he still works, actively in the industry as a Houdini technical artist. And so he's doing things that are just so far beyond my scope of ambition, but at the same time I run into things and he'll just come over and he'll show me like, hey, you know about this thing? Look at this new SOP, and oh, if you tried this, what if you did this thing? And so I've gotten a lot of my tricks and techniques from my son.
That's incredible. That's fantastic. I remember when he was when he was just a small boy, and it was unusual to see like who's this kid doing all these amazing things
And
on this
now he's a
computer.
dad and I'm a granddad.
Well, congratulations, pops.
Thanks.
So one final question before I let you go, and it comes back to my original conjecture point. And if I was to wrap this all up into one, very precise question, is what advice would you give to any kind of artist who's just starting off in the industry, and how would they go about learning proceduralism as quickly and as effectively as possible?
Well, how many hours do you have, Chris? There's a big answer there. That's volumes.
Yeah, I
Um,
know that's volumes, but we
yeah,
could go on and on and on. But a few minutes would be appropriate, I guess.
yeah. I think that probably the biggest thing is to just you kind of just stick with it. It's that it comes back to that attitude of patience and detective work. And like this just seems. I remember when I was first learning 3D software and Prisms, the previous to it was became Houdini. I was trying to learn that after I just learned a couple of things on the Amiga a little bit. And they gave me the manuals. I didn't have anybody to work with. I was just trying to learn it on my own. And uh, I'd watch they had some VHS tapes you could watch that show you stuff, and they were, oh man, they were a recipe for sleep. If I was sleepy, man, that would put me right away. But I think it's just that sticking with it. There were times I would just go, I'm so in over my head. There's no way. I'm just not cut out for this. I'm not. This is not my mindset. But I wanted to be able to do it badly, and so I just kept coming back to it and coming back to it. And then, there are things where you will get stuck on a little thing, and it just seems like it can go for a week. It can go. I just squashed a bug in my VR world that's been dogging me for almost a year.
Wow.
And it was just like, it was an optimization thing. It was just an error. It was just a simple, mistake. And I just couldn't find it. And you don't know what's caused it. Is it if I just pushed the hardware too hard? Am I, is my graphics card flaky? Or, I couldn't figure it out for the longest time. And and of course, it's not like I spent that whole year focused on it. There were times I just kind of go, yeah, I don't know what to do about that. I'll work on other stuff. But it kept kind of coming up, and it's just like I got to solve this. And so I had to learn all about optimization and profiling and using that detective work, over a few weeks. And of course, taking advantage of a handful of people and that I know well or not well. There was one guy that helped me that was kind of like, yeah, I got no business asking this guy to help me, but he seems to know. He might know what I need to know, and
Huh.
people are really gracious about it. So don't hesitate to ask for help, and just keep. Oh, that's the other thing. That search for novelty. You'll just keep learning stuff. Look at tutorials. Watch this thing, and pretty soon little bits will come out like, oh, you're reading some thread about some problem, and you go, hey, that relates to this thing I was wondering about before. And so there's that. Another thing I thought of earlier I wanted to say about proceduralism is something I have observed over the years in the industry. And of course, there's all different types and a million different ways to solve any given problem. Uh, and so however you do it, that's great. But I found that there's what I viewed as a mistake that is commonly made, and I would make myself sometimes, which is, on some level you can relate the love of proceduralism or the pursuit of it as a kind of laziness. That
Hmm.
it's just like, wow, I could avoid all this work if I did this little bit of work at the front, then all the rest of the work will be done for me.
Hmm.
And so there's this huge power and great advantage to proceduralism for reducing labor. But there are times where I would find myself, I would spend a week solving a thing procedurally that I could have knocked out manually in an hour. And so it's a good thing to kind of not be too purist about things. Look at hybrid approaches and really what's the most efficient way to get what I'm after. And also the just the experimentation process is fraught with failure and dead ends, and that's okay. You do a thing, you explore it a little bit. Um, Always consider every thing you're doing is kind of just a series of experiments that you go, okay, I learned that from this. Now I'm going to start over, but with this approach, or I'm going to take what I got there, but modify it and do another approach. So I think for me, that's a part of it that you can get lost in this, the beauty of the elegance of proceduralism, and you can wind up. Uh, I actually there was one I always remember was I went to a Houdini user group. It was back when it was Prisms,
Hmm.
and somebody presented this incredible demo of how they had written a SOP, surface operation procedure or whatever, a programmer had written this elaborate process to do wavy grass. Um, and it was like, wow, back then that was a pretty impressive thing.
Hmm.
And something about it bothered me, and I kept thinking about it. It was like, wow, that's amazing. And I don't think I could do that because I'm not the programmer he is. I could never write that. But it was sure brilliant and everything, but it kept bothering me, and I kept thinking about it. And suddenly I realized, I was thinking about it, I thought, I think I could do that with existing SOPs.
Hmm.
And sure enough, I sat down with Prisms, and I had the same waving grass with just a few already made procedures. I didn't
Right.
have to do anything too fancy. It was a clever, use of them or whatever. But just that's again, that laziness is your friend, because anytime something seems like a huge amount of work, there's got to be a better, more elegant solution.
Hmm.
And sometimes that elegant, better solution is just doing it by hand, just bearing down and just doing the work, making them one at a time or whatever you got to do. And sometimes it's like, wow, I could make these all by hand. It wouldn't take me that long, but it's kind of a lot of stuff. And
Yeah.
so you go, well, let's look at well, how would I do this procedurally? And likewise, if you're doing a procedural thing and you get an idea for it, and it's like, oh my God, I'd have to write that's a lot of SOPs, and that's a lot of process, and ooh, that's a lot of hoops to jump through for a procedural thing. There's probably a simpler procedural solution.
Hmm. Yeah. So it's almost the way you create your procedural systems is almost organic, of where you have to kind of let it grow and evolve and kind of achieve its own stability without going into kind of like a blind zealot. We're going to apply proceduralism for
Yeah,
everything, damn it.
and it's human nature, and it's a practice that I've tried to develop over the years of being able to uh, we tend to get in a mindset. We tend to get in a mode, like I'm in programmer mode, I'm in artist mode, I'm in this mode, I'm in experimental mode, I'm in critical uh, editorial finessing mode, whatever. We have all these different modes, and be able to be aware of the mode you're in, and if it's appropriate for the step you're on or for the process you're trying to achieve. You want to try to, keep those modes in mind and be aware of them and use the most appropriate mode or mindset for a given process or a
Yeah,
given stage of a process.
right. I think keeping everything in balance is really the best approach, and I think that's very
Yeah.
well
Well, and
effective.
we have this, it's especially, I think, I know for me and for a lot of artists, uh, and technical folks, it's a we're very good at focusing our attention. We get into a thing and the world goes away and we are focused on this task and we're solving it with a certain mindset. And when you're in one of these high states, or state of high attention, um, that makes it all the more difficult to shift modes and to recognize that it's time to shift modes. And so you can get, you know, you can get stuck in experiment mode and you never finish the thing.
Right.
Or you can get in hypercritical finessing editorial mode and never finish the thing. Or
Mm-hmm.
you can get in like kind of brainstorming, anything goes, it'll be fine, it's all going to work out mode, and you don't make anything very good. It's sloppy, you know.
Yeah,
So
right.
it's like you kind of got to be able to, that no one mode is appropriate for every stage of the creative process.
Right, right. No, I think that's brilliant advice that is very, very poignant, and it's something important for anyone just starting off to really be aware of.
I
So,
think it helps, it saves time.
absolutely. So, is there anything else that you wanted to add before we take off here?
Um, well, yeah, I could go on for days, but I think those are some, pretty major ones that I think would maybe be good advice. Just keep at it and recognize your mental state when you're in a given process, if it's appropriate. I think
Okay.
those are pretty good.
Well, thank you very much. Well, that's it for today's interview with Kevin. So, Kevin, thank you very much for joining us today.
Thank you. It was my pleasure. I love doing it.
All right, great. And we'll see all you folks later.
Bye.
Bye. Oh, I forgot to put on my headset there. Anyway, thank you very much for joining us today for our interview with Kevin Mack. And if you liked what you saw today, go ahead and subscribe to my YouTube channel. That's Chris Rhoda. And I can also be checked out on LinkedIn. And on LinkedIn, there's the Tech Art Talk, Tech Art EDU little kind of sub page over in LinkedIn. And on Facebook, I am there as well as the Orlando Houdini users group. And go ahead and check that out. And if you're interested in Houdini, tune into this channel again at 3 o'clock this afternoon. And we will be going on with part 2 of our kind of coverage of Mixamo and Chops. And this is kind of like a quickie brain dead introduction to rigging inside of Houdini, which is a lot of fun. Anyway, check me out on my, if you want to talk, send me email at chris@techartedu.com, and that should be good enough. Thank you very much for joining us for Tech Art Talk Live, and we'll talk with you and see you again next week. Have a great weekend.